Okay, we've got some more folks coming in. So hi, everybody. If you'll do me a favor, I'm Kelly Corbin. I'm the Director of Operations here. If you could do me a favor and go ahead and just mute yourself, and you can kill your video for the time being. Okay, we'll get some more folks coming in. So hi, everybody. If you'll do me a favor, I'm Kelly Corbin. I'm the Director of Operations here. If you could do me a favor and go ahead and just mute yourself, and you can kill your video for the time being. Okay, and we'll get.
Did you get that worked out?
Yep, we got it. That's always what happens when we go live on YouTube. It always picks it up first, but we should be good. You'll see that that's up here in the corner, and we'll be good here. All right, guys. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. We've got lots of people coming in, so just bear with us here. If you'll go ahead as you come in, please mute yourself and kill your video. And there'll be a chance for you to function in the chat. I'll go over those ground rules in just a second, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dean, who has a great panel of guests today. And those are the folks that you came to hear, not me. So just real quick, if you see in the bottom, there's a menu button. I don't know how most of you have probably used Zoom with COVID over the last several years, so you're pretty familiar with it. But the chat function, you can send comments, you can send questions directly to me. My name is Kelly Corbin. I'm kind of the moderator for this. And I will forward those to Dean as the panel moderator as we get into that part. And then the way it's going to go is Dean's going to kind of open it up for the conversation with these chief executives from across the country and talk for probably about 30 or 45 minutes. And then we'll open it up for some questions and comments. Because we want to have a conversation. So, but the goal is to do this in about an hour, maybe just a little bit more. So just keep that in mind, and we appreciate you being here. Dean, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, Kelly, how many folks do we have? We have a lot of people in. Are we ready to go? Because we had over 100 registrants, in which we're so excited that people decided to join us. I mean, this has been something I've been looking forward to for several weeks when we began to talk about doing this. How many we got?
Right now, we are up to 60 people.
Okay, awesome. Well, I think, you know what, we'll go ahead and get ourselves started, and we'll see where we're at right here. First of all, I want to thank our panelists. You're going to see the panelists in the top there. We got Todd Gibson from Moore, Oklahoma. We've got Ricky McMillan from Flowood, Mississippi. We got John Lau from Titusville, Florida PD. And we got Alfonso Williams, the sheriff of Burke County. These folks were invited to this webinar today because, first of all, I have a personal relationship. But secondly, I have been watching their departments over the last several years. And these guys are doing some great things regarding the current state of law enforcement and some of the problems and some of the issues that we're facing right now. And they're doing an outstanding job, and they've got some observations. They're living these problems. They're seeing them every day. And so the idea came about to get them together. What we do at Leaders Helping Leaders Network is that's what we're all about. We want other leaders to help other leaders get better at doing what they're doing. And in law enforcement, it's really kind of hard to get everybody together. There's just a lot going on. People are really busy. So we thought about, let's do a live webinar and let's talk about some of the current issues that are going on. And let's get some of our panelists to talk about some of the things and ideas that they've got. Now, we know this is a really, really tough time in law enforcement. There's a lot going on. We know that our communities we kind of have a disconnect with them. We have a lot going on. So we're going to talk about the problems in law enforcement. And of course, we can't do all of them. There's no way we could do all the problems. So we're going to limit today to 3 specific areas. And if you've got an area out there that you really want us to talk about, or you want to hear what they've got, of course, we'll talk about that. And of course, we'll address that issue. But as you know, we just can't do them all. So we're going to talk about 3 specific areas. And the way this webinar is going to go is I'm going to talk about the areas that we're going to discuss. And then I'm going to talk, let them, the folks in the panel, talk about some of the things they're seeing. And then we're going to offer suggestions, the things that we can do to maybe help with some of the issues that we're seeing. Now, in law enforcement, it's not like working anywhere else. You have to be very committed. You have to believe in this job. You have to really kind of be all in. And so we're seeing a change of that and some of the attitudes around the country. But let me talk about the three areas that we're going to try to address. The first one is going to be the narrative of police and community support. Now, that in itself could be a 2-day webinar, but we know there's an issue there, and we've got to talk about, we've got some ideas and suggestions on helping people recapture that narrative and how to get that community support back. The second thing we want to talk about in this webinar is hiring and retention. Now, as you know, it's very difficult to hire in today's world. And we're also seeing cops who are in this job 15, 20 years really trying to look for a way out, not really loving the fact that they made that decision 20 years ago. So we're seeing those things. And then the third thing is we're seeing probably, and this is what really prompted me to do this webinar, was I'm seeing a paralysis of police. In other words, cops are just not being as proactive as they were in the past. We've stopped doing our aggressive patrols and functions, not because it's like we want to do it, but we just don't feel like we're supported. And I have seen the worst morale and the lowest morale and the paralysis of police. Now, I'm not trying to make a statement that that's every cop is that way, but as a rule, we're seeing this as a generalization across the country. And I'm actually in the classroom with people every single week, and I've been into every part of the country over the last 3 or 4 months. I have never seen cops as angry as I see them now, and as their morale is low as it has been. So we got to, as leaders, we've got to do some things to pick this up. We cannot afford to go much longer with the separation of the communities and the separation of the police and our officers paralyzed and the hiring and retention and the community support kind of not there. We've got to find a way to do that. Now, I'm not trying to sell a bad negative picture. Matter of fact, on the contrary, I'm trying to tell you this is a great opportunity for us to find innovative, creative ways to reconnect to our communities. And some of these ideas that our folks have got out there are really going to help you today. So I'm going to welcome each one of these panelists in. Well, you kind of know what we're going to be talking about. And I'm going to go kind of how they look on my screen. And they look on my screen. I'm going to go, John, I'm going to go first to you. Then Ricky, I'm coming to you. And then I'm going to Alfonso. And then I'm going to go to Todd. So if you'll take just a second and just kind of say, introduce where you're from, and just talk about a couple of things, and then we'll move this thing, and then we'll get into kind of some of those problems individually. All right, John, it's over to you, buddy. Thank you.
How you doing?
Great.
Yeah, so my name is John Lau. I've been in law enforcement for 30 years, all 30 years here in the city of Titusville. I appreciate you putting this on, Dean, because this is very, very important. And the best practices and sharing best practices is really what it's all about. You know, it really gets down to it. In many ways, a lot of the things that I'm going to be talking about today, I'm very blessed. I have a city, 5 out of 5 of our city council support what our men and women are doing. I think I have the best city manager in the country. And that is another huge, huge thing, and a supportive city. But we have to be, for us, it's going right back down to
continue using iHeartRadio, please log in on your microphone while not driving.
The basics being community policing, getting out in the community. You mentioned about the narrative of police today. If folks now are just starting to bond and try to get to know their community, it's going to be a challenge. But all of the investments that we have made over the years, all of the deposits we've made into our community has actually really started to show. And so that's basically
Well, John, let me say one thing about your community. Your community has had a number of challenges with police shootings or issues that have occurred over the last years. So you're not just talking from a standpoint of everything's been wonderful and, all this. There's been a lot of issues. So I just want people to realize that. And one of the reasons you're on here is because of your experience in making those things better. And part of what you've done has helped. So we can't wait to hear some of your ideas. Ricky, if you would, buddy.
Well, here in Flowood, let me start by saying I'm Ricky McMillan, I'm the Chief of Police in Flowood. I've been in Flowood for 18 years. I've been in law enforcement for a little over 30. We're a unique community. We are a small knit community. We only have 10,000 residents, but we have 4 major state highways that run in and through our community. So we move anywhere from 200 to 250,000 cars through our community in a day. That being said, our officers are very proactive. We did hit a lull, you was talking about a while ago, we did hit a lull during the COVID year, or when COVID first started, we hit a very lull as far as being proactive. But since then, I mean, when you sit on where we sit, which is outside the city of Jackson, which is our capital city that has, a real high murder rate and stuff like that, our guys have to be proactive in order to keep our community safe. And that's one of our biggest things here. We want to fight crime where crime exists. We want to make sure that when you cross that into Rankin County, into Flowood, that our people know that they're being protected.
Well, and let me mention something about Ricky's community. I've been there, and it's a great community, but it sits right on the outside of Jackson, Mississippi. If you don't realize, you can look it up. Jackson, Mississippi, in terms of the size, is the state capital there, I believe, of Mississippi.
Yes.
And it also, there's probably 100 and some odd thousand there, 140,000 maybe.
Something like about 150.
About 150,000. And they have already had almost 150 murders this year. So that per capita is one of the highest in the country. So that kind of tells people of the community right outside the door for the reason of proactive. There's a lot of crime issues near you, if you will.
Right. And one of our biggest troubles, like you said, has been getting applications in and retaining officers and stuff like that. But to me, it's not just in law enforcement. My fire service, my fire chief has the same issues with finding good applicants and retaining people just as I do. So I don't think that's, as far as us, is an issue directly toward law enforcement. I think it's just a deal in general. But that being said, we had to alter the way we do go out and recruit. We go into the colleges more. We do have academies here that have self-sponsor cadets. So we do send our training officer there to recruit at the academy level. And that's been very successful for us. We're a 52-man department. We're blessed that we're 50 out of 52 on staff, with 3 getting ready to go to the academy. So I'm very glad to be here. I can't wait to see how this all comes about. I'm looking forward for some great discussions.
Okay, thank you, Ricky. I appreciate it. We're going to Alfonso now, the sheriff of Burke County. You got to unmute yourself, Al.
There we go. Hello, everybody. Dean, thank you so much for inviting me to be on. Look, we are here to mentor our cohorts and to help in this changing world. Everything's changing. We find ourselves wanting to go back to the way it used to be, and that's just not happening. It's a new world. It's a new world view. Everything is changing, from crime to technology to families and communities. And we've just got to find more ways to be proactive in our approach to hiring, training, and retaining the best qualified folks. We've got to find ways to be more intentional in forging partnerships and relationships. And when we get into these crises, if you look back historically, we always go back to what works, and that is relationships and partnerships. Human to human, getting away from being robotic and being intentional about improving people's quality of life and changing lives. So this is my 32nd year in law enforcement. I'm really looking forward to our conversations today. And I think we've got to change the way we approach these issues. And that is, we just got to find servant leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. And so thank you, Al, for that. Now, Todd Gibson from Moore, Oklahoma.
Chief Chris, thank you so much for letting me be here. This is an honor to be with you guys and to be participating in this. One of my goals today is to absolutely learn something. I'm in my 26th year in law enforcement. Prior to being chief, I was a sheriff of this county, of Cleveland County. And Moore in Cleveland County sit in the Oklahoma City metropolitan area. Kind of what we're known for, unfortunately, is tornadoes. So if you look at Moore, Oklahoma, you'll see a lot about tornadoes. But I can assure you, anybody who's sitting there thinking, what's this guy from Oklahoma talking about? I did not ride a horse to work today, and I've never slept in a teepee my entire time. But we're right dab in the middle of a large metropolitan area. We face many of the same problems that people do across the country. And we as well are looking into the future on how can we mold the next generation of law enforcement, and what is that exactly going to look like as we move forward in 21st century policing and addressing some of the challenges. And so hopefully something that we're doing, you can lean on and you can develop and expand on, and hopefully I can learn something today that we can bring back here home to Oklahoma. So Chief Chris, I appreciate so much you having me on.
Well, man, we're glad to have you. And Todd is located right outside of Oklahoma City. And there's a lot going on there, where a city very similar to their size, Norman, Oklahoma, where the University of Oklahoma is, they're having a very difficult time retaining cops. They've lost a large number of their force there because of some of the policies and things that have been enacted. Where I'm from, in Asheville, North Carolina, post George Floyd, it's the department of 245 officers. They have lost over 95 cops since the George Floyd case because of some of the things and the support of law enforcement. Now, if you're fortunate enough to be in a community where you have a lot of support, then we will certainly lean on you telling us and helping us to understand how do we get that type of support, because it's not that way around the country. And we are in a crisis period of time. I think one of the things that kind of, I will say, and I don't mean for this to be critical of anyone, but one of the things that have happened to us in law enforcement is that we've become what I call intellectually lazy, meaning the fact is that times have changed as much as Al has said right in front of us, but we've always depended on doing it like we did yesterday, and that being satisfactory for tomorrow. Well, we all know that these times are going to require us to think ahead of the box, and not even outside of the box, but we got to think about other boxes. And so I want to talk about the community support and narrative, because we have seen that around the country kind of go to the point where cops are not heroes anymore. They appear to be villains in a lot of people's eyes. And if you look at police actions anymore, people don't look for immediately to talk about trust. They talk about, well, what happened is the person the police either shot or arrested, are they a victim? Now, that's a very strong change from what we're used to. And a lot of that has to do with just trust in itself, because the fabric of where we're at, because the actions of a few has caused distrust amongst law enforcement. Now, I want to make this observation, and then I want to hear what you guys have to say about community support and the narrative of police. But as far as I know, law enforcement is the only profession where the actions of one can cause discredit of the actions of all. And that is a very strange occupation and profession where that occurs. No other profession do I know of where the actions of one person can cause discredit across the entire board to law enforcement. It doesn't happen in nursing. It doesn't happen in doctoring. It doesn't happen in lawyering. It doesn't happen in teaching. It doesn't happen in any other profession. And so that is how fragile the trust of our communities are, that the actions of a person outside of our own agency that would be across the country can have a negative impact on the actions of our officers inside of our agencies. Now, if you don't think that's a crisis period of time, then we really need to get you to think a little bit differently. But I am seeing the narrative being ripped away from us, and that we are no longer telling our story. We're letting other people tell our story. Never in the history have you seen such activist groups that are actually paid to go out and create a negative narrative of law enforcement. You've not seen that before. We actually have people who are out there and they do everything they can do to tear down the trust between police and the community. So I'm opening it up to you guys, and I want to hear if you're seeing the same things that I'm seeing. And I do want to talk about some things that we can do to return our narrative of that. But I want to think, are you guys seeing the same thing I am?
Well, here in Flowood, like I said, before George Floyd, we already had a very strong relationship with the churches, our schools, our neighborhoods. But we're in such a pro-police atmosphere here in Rankin County and Flowood, Mississippi, that after George Floyd, even though the nation was kind of ripping itself apart, we were actually strengthened by our community. Our community actually came together to give us more support than we had actually before George Floyd's death. But I do want to touch on what Alfonso said as far as making partnerships. I think we have to do that as leaders as well. That's why I reached out to the chief of a neighboring jurisdiction of mine over in Ridgeland, Mississippi, Chief John Neal. We've actually partnered up with you to bring not only the servant officer to Flowood, hopefully during the train the trainer. Also, we do the intentional leadership and the master leadership. We have got to get our guys focused on the realization that we are in a service-oriented industry and we are simply here to help people. And so I think that's how we're going to actually be able to bring our profession back, is really changing the mind of one officer at a time.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's no doubt that that's true. Folks, the rest of you?
I agree. The city of Titusville has 50,000 residents, and we sit right opposite the Kennedy Space Center, just so you can picture it in Florida, Central Florida. We have 100 sworn officers. Since January 1 of 2020, we hired 31 officers. That's 2 years and 1 month. A 100-man department hired 31. The problem is we lost 25. Now, the challenge with that is 8 of the 25, or 8% of our police officers, changed careers. Then you had about 6 of the 25 changed departments. Some of them went federal, some of them went forward. And the challenge, we're not having problems finding people. The days of going to a police academy and on the day of graduation with your business card, those days are gone. They are completely gone. Down here in Florida, you're actually finding people that have the heart, the servant heart for leadership and for police law enforcement, and then we're putting them through. We're actually paying them to go to the academy. Back into the community side, building the community. What I have personally seen here is the difference, I guess, good to great, approachable versus accessible. And we have given cell phones to every single officer. They give that phone number out. And not only do we give out our numbers, but we actually pick up. And that little bit has really helped us over the past 2 years.
So you're actually getting the cell phone numbers and giving them to the officers to give out to the community. So what you're saying is that relationship one by one is really paying off for you guys. Now, this is something that I want to consider. I just want to make this, I want to make this statement about the narrative thing, for example. I want you to realize that the statements I make are just based upon things I wished I would have done when I was chief and things that I want to see happening and things that I see working. So when I say this, I'm saying this in the spirit of really trying to get all of us to help each other out here. But one thing I want to say is that leaders during this particular time have to lead. They cannot sit back and wait for things to return to the way they were. Alfonso said that earlier in his comment, and it is so true, but we can't wait. And I made a statement, and I want you to think about this in terms of the narrative. You know, our narrative is really, really kind of at the core of who we are. If somebody else is telling the police story, then we really can't afford that. We've got to tell our own story. And I think what you're trying to do, John, and what you're saying is, and what Ricky had said, the individual officer one at a time. But I think you guys are saying, reconnect that officer individually to one relationship at a time that helps the narrative. Now that helps individually, no question. But we have got to start taking advantage of the social media, and we have got to find where people are. You can do those one relationship at a time, but if you're not doing the mass communicating with your message, then you're going to be way behind, because somebody else is mass communicating. The second that something happens, they're sending a narrative out. Now, I just want cops to think about this for a second, because what I'm really wanting to do in this webinar is to get, and live webinars, to get people to think. So I just want to propose a statement to you for a second. And I know this is kind of like, you're going to think, well, that's way out there. But I want you to think about this for a second. Imagine this. We give people guns, we give people equipment, we give them the ability, we give them the laws, we give them our policies, we give them the ability to take a life of an individual. And we trust them with all those things, but we won't trust them with a tweet. We won't trust them to get the message out to their community. And so we'll trust them with a gun, but we won't trust them to put a post out to where they're telling their story of things that they're doing. And all I'm saying is that I know the circumstances of releasing everybody to tweet. I'm not advocating that at all, but there has to be a better control mechanism where these officers, when they do reconnect to their communities, they're giving that message out to their communities. And I think it's really important to realize that there are so many good stories out there that cops are doing every day. We've got to give them a way to tell their story that falls in line with the message that we want our public to have. And you as the chief and you as the head executive can't control all those messages. You've got to give the people the way to do it. And I'm going to step back and let y'all either eat that comment alive or comment on it.
The Chief, what I'd say to that is, I think you're exactly right. Unfortunately, law enforcement has been drawn into this national political arena. I don't think we want to be there, but nonetheless, we are there. And I think many of us on this call today, we can remember the day that when the police officer showed up, when the police officer walked into court, what the police officer said was truth. And that's unfortunately just not the case today. And whereas in the past, we could sit back and we could let our community come to us, we have to be more intentional about pushing out and reaching out in a variety of ways to connect with our community, to be transparent, to continue a constant dialogue of communication back and forth between us and our community. And you can't just take a one size fits all. You can't take a one strategy to do that. You have to be multifaceted with your strategy. But one of the most important things, I think, that enabled to first start doing that is you have to have your house in order. You have to have your own house in order. You have to have your police officers and the culture inside your organization operating in the right method. It's an inside out approach. We have to address issues in our community, connect with our community, and work with our community. We, as Sir Robert Peel said so many years ago in the 1800s of his modern day principles on policing, we are just simply members of the public paid to give full-time attention to something that's incumbent upon everybody in our community. But sometimes and nowadays, we live in a very self-centered world here in the United States, and people don't want to engage people have been pushed a narrative that there's a distrust for law enforcement. When you look at Gallup polls, and the most recent Gallup poll, still today, law enforcement is in the top 5 of most trusted professions in the United States. When you look at officer-involved shootings, the numbers do not match the narrative. And I think we as law enforcement leaders have to, like you've said, Chief Chris, take back that narrative and start driving the future of law enforcement and where we're going and what the truth is. We've sat back for too long. And as leaders, we have to drive internally and externally with a multifaceted approach on how we make sure our community is connected with us.
And it does take courage to lead. I mean, there is absolutely no doubt about it. And I want to say this in terms. So somebody needs to mute their microphone, please. Kelly, can you mute them? Okay. So what I want to say about the social media thing is this, that this is kind of what I know. This is going to sound crazy to folks, but we're not in normal times. And when you're not in normal times, you have to do things outside of the norm. And I would say this, I would recommend, listen, ask yourself this: how much do you spend on your SWAT team? If you're not spending equally as much on your social media team as you're on your SWAT team, you're way behind, because you need to get that message of the cop support equally as you do tactically and technically proficient. Now, talking about the servant officer, which Ricky mentioned earlier, the one of the things that we've talked about is creating that servant officer, but that's embracing the tactical, technical proficiencies, but that's also creating that servant mindset that he talked about. And we got to get that message out there. Now, what I am seeing is a psychological safety of the police officer being destroyed. And what I mean by that is that if you're going to do this job where you risk your life and you are put in situations where you are going to make arrest, you have to be psychologically sound to believe that when you do, you're going to be supported by your bosses and by your communities. And when we see that taken from cops, then what it does is it creates a psychological safety where they don't feel safe, and it paralyzes them. And they appear to be paralyzed on that. And I think that what happens is this narrative comes about to where cops don't believe they're going to get support, because we have people actually actively out there telling you we are not going to support you no matter what happens. So I think the departments have to be really proactive and return to go on, to move forward with our message and go on. I wouldn't say the attack, but you've got to get your message out about what you're doing. And so I've said a lot there, and I'm going to give you guys a chance to, post in. So go ahead. Al, I know you want to say something.
Yeah, I've always got something to say. I'll tell you what we have done historically in law enforcement, and that is law enforcement executives across the country, whether you're police chief or sheriff, we have got to be unorthodox in our methodologies and in our leadership principles. The old days of saying it didn't happen in my backyard, so I can't speak about that, or the police shooting is under investigation and it'll be several days before we can talk about it, or hiding behind an attorney who says, I've got to protect the city, so you can't go on and give a speech about anything. I decided when I became sheriff that I was going to die to politics and pension and paycheck and position and power and popularity and prestige. And I'm going to tell the truth at every opportunity I get. And so we've got to stop leading with an alarm clock mentality and start leading with an opportunity clock. And that is, we're drinking from a fire hose all day, every day, and we're paying attention to what's going on within the agency, but we're not hovering high enough to realize what's happening across the country. Because what happens in Minneapolis and Brunswick, Georgia, and in Seattle, Washington affects us here in Burke County, Georgia, and it affects you in Charlotte, North Carolina, and in Asheville. So we have got to get rid of this ideology that We're afraid of our jobs. We're afraid of our positions. We're trying to protect a pension and a paycheck and prestige, and we're trying to be popular, and we don't want anybody upset with us. And we think that we can have success without controversy, and it cannot happen. And so we have got to have a real mindset adjustment. And we have got to get leaders thinking that we've got to tell our narrative. It's what you said earlier. Either you're going to tell the story or the story is going to be told. And I run into law enforcement executives all the time who say things like, we have all these feel-good things going on in our communities, but the media isn't interested in telling the good narrative. Well, they may not be, because they're in the money-making business as well. So we can't wait on them to tell our stories. We've got to be out front. And boy, you said the most profound thing I've heard in a while, and that is, if you're not investing an equal amount of resources into telling your story and pushing your narrative as you are giving to the SWAT team, then you've got problems. A lot of the folks have lost purpose. They've lost purpose, and that is, you got to realize that you've got to be intentional about finding your purpose in life. Our purpose is to serve mankind. We have got to get every officer thinking every single day that I've got to go to work tomorrow to change a life. And until you discover that purpose, you'll always wonder, why do I get up every day and put on this uniform and go out and work for people who do not appreciate me? You've got to realize that your purpose has to be produced by a conviction that you have and a vision that you have to serve mankind and to be an influence in this community. And publicly, police officers are looked upon with a jaundiced eye, because oftentimes what we do is public, and violence is never pretty. So when we've got life, it doesn't look good. But the cleanup starts before the crisis ever occurs. It's what these chiefs are doing. You've got to be out in the community every day. You got to be serving every day. You've got to be intentional about what you're doing. You've got to create partnerships and relationships, and you've got to forge those, and you've got to cultivate those every day, every hour, every opportunity you get. And we've got to stop saying, I'm too busy.
Oh, yeah. And Al, I mean, what profound words. And I want to say something that I am sensing, that I'm feeling from, and we have got to find a way as police leaders to really navigate our way through this. So let's unwrap this for a second. And I do want to spend a minute talking about it. Is what I am seeing is this psychological safety is being stripped from our cops and our people that are doing the job, because they don't think they're going to be supported by the community, and they don't think they're going to be supported by their leaders. So as a result of that, what happens is you can't do this job as a cop unless you believe in service. Now, what happens a lot of times, and all of you out there will see this, that after a person spends 10 or 15 or 20 years doing this, the service orientation is not as exciting as it once was, unless you're really fortunate and lucky. You know, if you're still in that mode, now you're more of in a different role, and you see things differently. And I say the two most exciting days of your life ought to be the first day that you are on the job, because then you believe in everything's possible, and your last day, because you've accomplished everything possible that you wanted to accomplish. You know, those should be your two happiest days. But what I am seeing is this psychological disconnection, because people aren't connecting to that servant orientation anymore. And they're just doing this job because of pension, because they have to, they can't do anything else. And we kind of get stuck. Now, let me tell you what I think is the ancillary thing of that, which I think is at the core of what we have really got to find a way to deal with this is cops are angry. Cops are mad. They are disappointed that their communities don't support them as much as they once did. They don't feel that love and connectivity with their communities that they once did. They're under fire because of the constant newspaper. Every time they take a step forward, then we get 4 steps back by somebody doing something, and then we're all put into this one barrel, if you will. So what I'm seeing is that cops are really angry. And when you get angry, you let your anger give you an excuse to do anything you want to do. So in other words, when you stop working or being proactive, you'll base it on the fact that you're angry, you're mad, you don't feel that connectivity, and then you'll justify it with yourself. Now, I'm not trying to say that cops are bad at all. I'm just trying to tell you what I'm feeling when I'm talking to cops every day. We're mad. We're mad that we don't have that community support and everything's happened. And we've been put in this barrel with everybody else when 99% of our cops are good. And another thing I want to say is, and I will say this publicly, I am disappointed in our major associations, IACP, Noble, PERF, FOP, National Sheriff's Association, for not taking the bull by the horns and sending the message out that cops are good. They're noble, and their service is what we have to have to our communities. Now, you know, say what you want to, but I don't hear any of them stepping up and saying, no, cops are good. And I myself am fed up with that. And I want to figure out, how do we get cops not to be mad? And how do we get them to return that?
You know who cops are mad at? Not so much the community. It sounds good to say they're all mad at the community because the community won't support them. They're mad at their leaders. They're mad at their leaders because the leaders will not stand up and support them, and the leaders will sacrifice them for paycheck, pension, politics, popularity, prestige, position. That's who they're mad at. They just don't know how to say it, or they can't say it because they too are concerned about all those P's that I just mentioned. The majority of the communities that we serve support law enforcement. There's a very small percentage of people who really want to defund the police or get rid of the police. There's a larger percentage that think social workers can do a better job, but they're just angry. Those folks too are angry because they don't know how to control the narrative. They don't know how to change the social injustices that they see. They don't know how to deal with the cancel culture for law enforcement that they see. And so they don't know how to deal with social media. Social media has really given police a bad image. Folks are not wanting to come into this business because they are tired of law enforcement leaders who are afraid of city councils and afraid of county commissions. And we are dealing with people who want to acquiesce to power. And when they get to power, they want to stay in power. So then all of their decisions are predicated on staying in power and not taking care of the troops. You can get an officer to work for almost nothing if you will value him and respect him and support him or her. They'll work for you for almost nothing. They rarely leave for money.
Absolutely.
Saying that we can't get people in this business because of pay and because communities don't respect us. In my community, much like the other chiefs who have spoken, you can almost not go to lunch any day and not have some member of the public pay for your lunch. They really do love us. They really do appreciate us. And that's what's happening. But to get a chief in Atlanta to speak out about an injustice in LA he's just not going to do it. He's just going to wait for it to show up at his door because he's afraid to have an opinion because he's afraid of his job. And until we get leaders who are not afraid, you're going to continue to have shortages. You're going to continue to have people that don't want to get into the business. They're afraid of overzealous prosecutors. They're afraid of chiefs who, when they're out there in the middle of the night and we're home asleep, they're afraid if I take this guy's life because he's put my life in jeopardy, what kind of support am I going to get?
And there's no doubt that whether it's supportive leadership or supportive community, the officers, the cops, all of us feel it. And it has gone to the core of us, cut a knife right in our service heart, if you will. And the only way we get that back is we get people to remember you got to have the mind of the warrior, do your job, make sure you think, but the heart of a servant. No matter what, we still have to serve through all this time. I'm going to say something about what you had said earlier, Al, and I want to give all the other panelists a chance to jump in here. But let me tell you something about law enforcement. The rules of law enforcement have changed, but the purpose has not. As Todd said, it is exactly the same purpose it was 100 years ago. We have just got to find a way for us to reconnect with that as a force, not one department at a time, but as a force, and retake our narrative back and get the message out. We cannot wait for the news stations in our local areas to be our marketing arm. They are not our marketing firm. They are not paid to be our messenger. We have to be our own messenger. So I'm going to give you guys on the panel a chance to chat at that. Todd or John or Ricky, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Chief.
John, I'll let you go.
Thank you, sir. What the sheriff said is absolutely 100% correct. You can't be a leader, really a leader in any position, but specifically a law enforcement leader, if you're playing not to lose. You have to play to win. And playing to win is doing the right thing for the right reasons, no matter what that message is. You have to have the courage to tell the mayor or a city manager, no, sir, this is not the way it's going to be handled. It's going to be handled this way. Now, just like we nurture relationships in our communities, we also have to nurture relationships with our elected officials as well as our, boss. In my case, the city manager runs day-to-day business. And so those relationships, when we have a crisis situation, a police-involved shooting, I've already built that relationship with my boss. He knows that I'm going to keep him at an arm's distance away because really he needs to be. This needs to be done our way for our reasons, for transparency and all. As far as the social media, I never thought in a million years I would ever say this, but it is so important to send our message. Dean, you helped me 3 years ago with that matter, and it was stay on the offense without being offensive is what you said to me during that. And what we've learned, the media, it used to be where, hey, you have to have a relationship with the media. It's just what you have to do. But they don't quote correctly. They completely mishandle it. So I've changed our appearance. Our local newspaper, when they ask for comment, it basically says, we don't recognize you as a normal media source. We don't talk to them. We do it all on our social media. How do we get more people to go to our social media? We advertise that we're not going to run radar in our city that we don't post it on our social media. So we are getting more and more hits on social media because people don't want to get hit by a radar gun. So we're
absolutely amazing.
And we're encouraging that. And I'm not kidding you. We do not run radar unless it's posted first on social media. So our hits have gone up. And now our message, we're doing videos left and right. We had a police involved shooting right after Christmas, this past Christmas. And we had some local attorneys that were not even local. I'm sorry. It was basically Mr. Crump was in our city doing what he does. And we had, as soon as they were doing their thing, we hit send on our video and on what really happened, not the lies that he was going to share. And it completely quelled everything in our city. So Sheriff, you're spot on. We have to be more proactive and get that message out. We no longer, and we still have a great relationship with our networks, NBC, ABC out of Orlando. We have a very good relationship with our media, but we no longer rely on them. We don't need them anymore.
Let me say something, John, and I want to, and what a great comment. And man, this panelist, thank you all so much. I love it. And we're getting so many positive comments on the chat about, hey, push the narrative, understand what's going on. But let's talk about recruitment for a second. And I want to make this observation about recruitment because recruitment goes deeper than you may think. Only we need to look at recruitment. And when I go around the country, I think recruitment is one of the most difficult things. But I want to tell you why I think recruitment is one of the most difficult things. And I think this is what you have to work past, only because I'm seeing it everywhere I go. So recruitment has really taken a hit in law enforcement over the past few years, no question. So I started thinking about, why is that the case? And interestingly, when I'm in a class or I'm out talking to cops and I get to talk to, 50 to 100 to 500 people, depending where I'm at, and I always ask them, how many of you would like for your kids to be a cop right now if they were 21 years of age? And honestly, I only get one person that may answer that out of 50, 100, or 200. The reason recruitment is so difficult is because we've stopped recruiting our own family members to law enforcement. When you stop recruiting your family members, that goes to a core message of your belief in this profession has certainly changed. And we've got to figure out a way that we return that narrative. I'm not telling you to recruit your kids to this profession. What I am telling you is that's causing us major problems. And it shows you the depth of how angry and how mad and how our cops are really, disillusioned with this job. When you stop recruiting your own children, you change the face of law enforcement, because those folks who are coming in now do not understand the core of law enforcement like your children would. They don't understand the service orientation, the sacrifice orientation. And so the narrative has certainly changed. I just throw that out there to tell you what I'm seeing. And we really don't see us recruiting our own people. So recruitment is a real problem. And Al, like you said earlier, those are all things that certainly go into play with us not believing we're supported. Chad, I'm going to give you, go ahead. You were going to say something after John, so go ahead.
Well, to touch on recruiting, I would tell you that, when you look back over our history of recruiting and you look how many agencies recruit even today, we talk about technology, we talk about innovation, but we've been slow in innovation when it comes to recruiting. And historically, you might have 10 positions open within your organization. You open up applications, you get 500, 600 applications. And we have this very rigid process where we're looking for reasons, we're looking for opportunities, and we're looking for the smallest detail to kick somebody out, because really we have too many applicants. And that's just not the case today. Today, we have to be more intentional. We have to get outside the box, and we have to shift that paradigm from how do we exclude you or how do we keep you from getting or cut you, and more of how do we keep you? How can we help you join our team? And then speaking of that, sometimes we want to relegate recruiting to a specific office or a specific group of officers. But really, the culture inside the organization is that everyone's a recruiter. That's and right. If you look at some of the most successful businesses, it's because they are intentional. They know what they're looking for. They know what their culture inside the organization needs. And then they're intentional about going out and getting that. And so law enforcement have to go out and get what we want in our community. We can't wait for them to come to us. And then once we have them in front of us, we have to be flexible in how we onboard them. So what do I mean by that? So what we see us doing now is we used to have certain hiring segments. We're in a constant flow of hiring. We are always hiring. We are always processing applicants. We have a pipeline. Instead of a static specific time, we have a constant pipeline. And so that pipeline is we're running testing where we might test 10 people in one day and 2 people the next day, because it fits within their calendar, within their schedule. We have looked at, in Oklahoma, for instance, marijuana is essentially a legal product, whereas it used to be you couldn't smoke marijuana or have smoked marijuana for the previous 5 years. We've reduced that time down to 2 years. Do we like it? No. Does society dictate that is what the standard is? Yes. And so we have to be more fluid and more flexible in how we recruit. And then we have to be intentional about going out and seeking the people that we want working in our organizations.
And that's so true, Todd. So listen, I'd like to give everybody a chance at this, but I do know we're getting close to the hour, which we promised everybody that we would stop. So I'd like to spend the next few minutes talking about one of the issues that we have talked a little bit about, but I want to hear what y'all have to say as we getting close to the hour being here. I want to talk about the issue of low morale and low commitment to the job and this paralysis that's going on in our communities with our police. And I'd like to open it up for you guys and to give us your take on, how do we address this low morale? Because we're seeing it, we're basically seeing the results of it. That our low morale is having an impact on officer engagement in the community. It's having an impact on officer proactivity. It's having an impact on our hiring and retention. It's really at the core of that. Now, I want to say one thing about that in terms of low morale. There's three things that you have to be in lockstep with in order for you to really enjoy your job. The first thing is you got to know what your just cause is. What do you believe in? What do you stand for in your job? The second thing is what your why is. Why are you doing it? What does it matter? Because these are at the core. And the third thing is being absolute concert with your purpose. If you know your just cause, your why, and your purpose, in other words, you work from inwardly knowing those things, your outward performance is always going to be better because inwardly you're really solid. And what we've seen is people's inward commitment be shaken by the facts of some things that's going on. So what I want to ask you, I'm going to ask you guys to give all of you a shot at this. What do we do about morale? And please, I don't care who opens it up. Let's take it. Alan, we'll go to you first.
Yep. So Dean, I think morale, the majority of the time is overrated. And people, officers will always say, oh, morale is the worst I've ever seen it. Folks are tired of having supervisors that don't know how to lead. They are trying to be leaders, but they're just managers of resources. And it's incumbent upon every leader to ensure that from top down, he's espousing emotional intelligence over knowledge. And in law enforcement, we think you have to have the knowledge. And we say things like, well, you don't have to have a degree to do this job. Well, you didn't have to 50 years ago, and you don't have to have one now, but it sure would help. And you wouldn't tell your 2-year-old college is not for you. So we've got to get away from saying those kinds of things first. But we have folks who didn't properly prepare themselves, and they got into this job because it was easy. It didn't take a whole lot to get hired. You just got to have a fairly clean background. In Georgia, doesn't take a whole lot. And so there's no standardization across the country in terms of recruitment. You go to Florida, it's one thing. You come to Georgia, it's something totally different. You go up north and it's different. We've got to find some standardization. We've got to stop having places where you've got to work for 40 years. In Burke County, Georgia, you got to work 46 years until you can get to Medicare because you can't take your health insurance benefits with you. So we don't need a national police force, but we need some national standardization. When people have morale issues because they just haven't properly prepared themselves and made themselves marketable enough, and they hold the leadership accountable for making them happy. And you got to be happy within yourself. And it goes back to purpose and conviction and passion for what you're doing. And we have to remember, we didn't get into this business to be served by the community. We got in this business to serve the community. And I think that it's incumbent upon us to remind our troops of that. And we've got to stop putting people in position just because they're next, just because they have seniority or they've been there the longest. We've got to start putting people in position who understand that mentoring is everything in the agency. And if you're not mentoring and coaching and encouraging and helping your people, and it's not just policy, it's not just law, it's not just procedures, and it's not just standards. We've got to make sergeants better husbands. We've got to make sergeants better wives and better people, and get away from the whole police thing and just start making better people and changing lives. And we'll see a difference in morale and leadership within our agencies.
Okay. All right, Al, good stuff. All right, Ricky.
One thing I see is that, you're talking about how the officers, as they go throughout time, get more they angry and stuff like that. One thing, we have to all realize, as we go throughout a career, we see more and more and more of the bad things in society, and that kind of jades our mindset, if you will. That's why I'm excited about bringing servant officer here at Flowood, because it's going to be one of our foundational training tools where we're going to send our officers through it every year. Because at the end of the day, we have got to find a way to get each officer, no matter if he's a 1-year guy or a 20-year guy, to reestablish why he does this job to begin with. We have to take out all that hurt and anger and replace it back with pride, honor, and integrity. Because at the end of the day, like I said earlier, we're not going to change the narrative of law enforcement until we change each officer at a time. It's definitely not beyond our reach. I'm excited about our future, but simply because, we did lose some officers, but we have a department full of young guys that's growing up, that's learning the craft, that's on fire for serving people. And so I just think we have to, like you said earlier, spend just as much money on social media and just as much money in our budgets, renewing that mindset to have each one find their own way. We got to turn around. We got to make sure we retool our officers to be, more self-sufficient, self-reliant, and basically under self-control.
Absolutely.
We got to regain the narrative in our communities. I'm just fortunate that where I'm at, that we have such a great community support, especially with our aldermen and our mayor. It's just phenomenal. I can't think of a better place I would rather be than here in Flowood.
All right, I got you. All right, well, thank you. Thank you, Ricky. I really appreciate that. John, we'll throw it to you.
Yeah, the morale is important. I think the sheriff's comments on the supervision constantly, we make it mandatory. If you're thinking about becoming a corporal and certainly going into sergeant, you have to have as many leadership courses as possible. And it is extremely exhausting to be a good leader. And I think where we're starting to understand now where we have to improve is when you give someone stripes to be a sergeant and to be that leader out there, we have to keep on stoking the fire and making sure that we're staying on them. Some people are great cops and don't do very well in the leadership role. And we have to have the courage to then say, we're going to have to put the square peg back in the square hole. Because if all we do is promote someone that and keep them promoted, all it does is create that dissension among the troops. So we are blessed right now. Our morale is fairly good, really good, actually, considering what's out there. But it is because we have excitement at the sergeant and lieutenant level. And there's a lot of movement, there's a lot of growth in our city, and that is creating this excitement. And it's not creating competition, but we need to be pouring more and more. We doubled our training budget over the past 2 years because we're wanting to send more and more. And Dean, we're going to keep on hosting you as many times you can come to the city of Titusville, and we're going to continually send people through. And the other thing that I would, everyone listening, don't just focus on your sworn officers. Make sure you're sending your civilian staff through this leadership training too, because they're part of our team.
Oh, that's an excellent point. Todd, I'm gonna throw it to you, brother.
But I know we're up against time window, but I'll keep it short. What I will tell you is leadership has to get out of the office and get out in the field. Cops want to know that they are supported. When we talk about morale is a weird thing. We say patrol has morale, but patrol is an inanimate object. Morale deals with individual people, and individual people have morale, which is based on their motivation, satisfaction, and performance of the job. And so you don't know how much of an impact you leave when you get out and you interact with every element of your organization. Yes, it takes time. Yes, it's difficult. But the number one thing you can do is remind them of their purpose, keep them focused on the future and on the nobility of their job, and then get out and show them that you can still do the job with them. And you understand what the challenges that they're dealing with, because the challenges that they're dealing with today are different than some of the challenges that we dealt with as young officers. And they need to know that you understand that and that you're there for them and that you support them.
Man, I mean, that's awesome. And thank you guys for all your comments on morale. I'm going to summarize this thing. First of all, I want to thank everyone who has joined us on this live webinar. Hey, this has been so worthwhile for us to have this conversation, for your comments. I've been reading the comments on the chat. Thank you so much for being a part of this. And let me take 1 second here to kind of wrap this up with what I've kind of heard from everybody. One, you got to understand your purpose. You got to know what your cause is. You got to know your why. You got to understand your purpose. We got to reconnect to the purpose of law enforcement. The rules have changed. The purpose has not. We've got to get our cops to reconnect to that. The second thing, leaders have to lead. There is no substitution for leadership. You know, there's a football coach, and I forget the name. He was at South Carolina. He's a great guy, and Charlie Strong. And Charlie Strong said when he was a coach there, nothing good happens until leadership shows up. That is so freaking true. You've got to lead, and you've got to lead your troops. The third thing, we got to improve our narrative. Folks, we've got to take that narrative back. It's not just your issue in your town. Your narrative leaks over into other towns. Your narrative leaks over into other parts of your state. You've got to help each of us recapture that narrative that cops are good. Cops are doing this job because they love it. They're putting their lives on the line every single day, and they deserve the support of leadership and the communities, no question. The other is we got to return to that servant mindset. There is no substitution for that. You got to have the heart of the servant and the mind of the warrior. What we're doing, one of the things we're doing is we're featuring those servant officers. If you've got cops out there that have done something that you think is worthy to put out there that you want people to know, please share it on your site, but let us know, and we'll share it on our national site where we'll let everybody around the country know what they're doing. So we're featuring a servant officer as many times as we can get them. So I'm asking you folks, submit those servant officers. You can go to our website, and there's a link actually on there to submit that servant officer. But I want to thank everyone. Kelly, thank you. Mackenzie, thank you for putting this together. If you guys hadn't done what you did, this would not have happened. I want to tell you how much I appreciate that. Alfonso, thank you, my friend. Ricky, thank you so much. John, thank you, my friend in Titusville. And Todd, my friend, thank you so much. What a pleasure to have these leaders and to have heard from them today. I hope that we have met our goal of helping you leaders, helping Leaders Network, to help leaders help each other to become a great, great profession. We need our community to support us, and we need to support them. Todd said it earlier. The people are the police, and the police are the people. That's simple as it gets. Thanks to all of you for joining us, and this has been amazing. We're going to use this as a podcast. You'll be able to see it later, but thank you so much, everybody. Panelists, if you'll stay on for a few minutes instead of disconnecting, we're going to end the meeting. Kelly, thank you so much. We appreciate all of you for joining us today. What a pleasure and what an honor. Thank you.
Sorry.
Kelly, are we back together? Okay. You're muted.
Yes. Give us just a second. We've got people signing off here. I'm just
Okay. Let's let everybody clear out. We'll just have a short debrief here. Man, it was great to have everybody on. Thank you guys so much. It was so awesome to have. We had a great number of people. I think we were 80 or 90.
Yes.
We'll wait a minute here and then get into that.
We've got people, I think, that left their computers run in the background. So I'm just
you knock them off if you can.
I am. Give me just a second though. It just takes a second because I have to like not report them to, when you remove them physically from here, you actually can't, you don't want to get them in trouble with. All right, I think that's everyone. Let me make sure we're off of YouTube.
Okay.
All right, I'm gonna, you don't want to record this part of it, right?
There's still people in or on. Mackenzie said there were still people. We're just trying to